Welcome to the test set. Here we talk with some of the brightest thinkers and tinkerers in statistical analysis, scientific computing, and machine learning, digging into what makes them tick, plus the insights, experiments, and OMG moments that shape the field. Back in 2020, if you submitted a talk for Posit's conference, you might remember having to send in a 60-second video with your pitch. And you might think they were trying to figure out how good a speaker you were, but in reality it was almost the opposite. They wanted to bet on people with great ideas, who could figure out the speaking part through a little bit of training. And that speaker training bet basically rode on Ruth Milligan. Ruth is the founder of Articulation, a curator for TEDx Columbus, and the author of The Motivated Speaker. Over the years, she and her team have coached hundreds of PositConf speakers through a process that starts with a simple question. What's the one thing you want your audience to leave with? Ruth has a message for data scientists. We're smart and we're curious, and we have way too much to say. We cover deciding what your talk is really about, how much evidence your audience needs, and Ruth even put us through a speaking exercise to cure us of all our filler words, which honestly I need super bad. So with that, Ruth Milligan. Welcome to the test set. We're here with Ruth Milligan, founder at Articulation and a curator at TEDx Columbus, and author of the book, The Motivated Speaker. And I think a really interesting speaking coach. And I also love to use the word trainer. I feel like trainer is such a neat way to describe it. Ruth, thanks so much for coming on to the test set.
Thanks to all of you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and I know you and Posit go way back. I do also have to introduce us. I often forget that. So just to go the full loop, I'm the host, Michael Chow. I'm a software engineer at Posit and joined by our co-host, Hadley Wickham, who's a chief scientist at Posit, and Wes McKinney, who's a principal architect at Posit and also founder at Can.io, a new AI systems company. You heard it here first. Hadley, maybe you could tell us how y'all know each other, because I think you and Ruth go way back.
We met, I guess I reached out to Coach to get your help coaching the first, well, not PositConf, but our studio conf.
Do you remember who you learned me about from?
I feel, was it like Women in Analytics Conference, Women in Data Science?
Yeah, one of your associates was a speaker.
And I remember just thinking, like, what a brilliant idea that was to actually give people who speak at your conference training in giving talks. Because as a veteran of academic conferences, my experience is that most talks at most conferences are pretty terrible. So if you're going to spend all this time and money bringing people together, why not spend all the extra and make sure they do a good job of it?
When you called me, I specifically remembered the sort of complication you were experiencing, which was you needed to take your conference virtual because of COVID. And you also said something, I'm fortunate in my life. I get to not pick and choose what I want to do, but you said something that really, really sparked me, which was, I want to reach into people that normally wouldn't be chosen to speak, not just to name people, but I want to give more people an opportunity to give it a shot. And you knew that would be risky for the conference. So you said, let's pair the training. And that's where we started.
That reminds me of the other thing that I learned from you that I think we put into action pretty quickly was this idea, instead of asking people to submit like abstracts to PositConf, we asked them to submit like a 1-minute video. And that is such a good way of quickly telling is someone like genuinely passionate about this topic. And then even if that's as long as they're passionate, they don't have to be like a great speaker because we know they're going to get that training. Just made it so much easier to...
I have a favorite line I use, and you'll hear some of them today, I'm sure, which was, you can take a great idea and an average speaker and turn it into an awesome talk. But you can't take a great speaker with a crappy idea and turn it into an awesome talk. So if somebody's fearful or nervous or, those things we can work with, but like coming with the right idea is 90% of the challenge. And you can see that in the video, one way or another.
I don't know if I ever talked about this with you, Ruth, but I almost made this a rule that is if there is a musical instrument in the background of your video, you must play it during.
It's like Chekhov's gun for talks and instruments. Yeah.
We've had like a number of musical numbers that have been pretty amazing. So
There was I was just saying, I was watching the submissions for the TEDx I'm working on, and there was a woman with a guitar like right here over her head, and I stared at it the whole time like, do you play? Does someone else play? I'm going to take that and steal that from you. Yeah, if there's something in the background, it's worth it. So that's how, Michael, that's how Hadley and I met. Was he got a little idea and we took it from there. And I think your feedback over the years, I'll let you say like how the conference improved and actually how your filter really got more narrow about great talks.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I think that was the first talk I spoken at Posit. First Posit conference I spoke at, and kind of put me in touch with Posit in a lot of ways. It's interesting. That was kind of my foot in the door. And I do think that filming a submission was really helpful versus kind of like really getting stuck on the page a little bit. Though I know some people, it goes the other way.
Well, I'll also just say this, with Wes in the room and all of you guys working on AI things, you can't fake it when you have to submit a video. My son he's working on internship applications, was writing an essay yesterday, and I might have tucked like a paragraph or two into AI to check something, and he wrote me back on text. He's in another room. Promise me you didn't use any AI to use this to work on this. And I was like, I can't promise you. But we talked about it, and he is so anti this at this point, which is great. He saw some things happen at university that were troubling to him. He's like, I'm a human with really good ideas, and I can write these words. We want that in the submission. I know that that's not the case for everything, but we want your own ideas. But if we don't get it in writing, we can get it on the video.
I mean, AI can definitely help with like clarifying and structuring or organizing your thinking, but it needs to be your thoughts. And I think it's interesting how nowadays, like, there seems to be a certain portion of the population who are kind of hoping that the thinking can be delegated to the LLMs, but we're finding over and over that like they can't be trusted to think for us or to make decisions on our behalf, no matter how confident they seem or no matter how they suck up to us and tell us that their ideas are good, because of course they think their ideas are good. But human judgment remains, like, for what I've been saying over and over again, is that human judgment remains like the ultimate the taste making. So taste cannot be delegated,
nor can it be adjudicated on the I think, like, would you want AI defending you on a stand? That's, like, in my mind, why the actuaries have to sign off on the risk and the architects have to sign off on the plan. So yeah, but I do think there's a role for it.
I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about, I find it so interesting that you mentioned like a person who struggles with speaking with a good idea, that idea that they can kind of be trained and make it work. And I think you said something when we were preparing for this that reminded me of, which is that data scientists are smart, and they're working on compelling problems. But what you said there almost reminded me of that. Like, if you're a smart person and you have a compelling idea, like what big challenges do you see in that type of person, the sort of data scientist who's smart and compelling? What are they up against, do you think, when it comes to speaking?
I'm a big believer in 3, so let's see if I can come up with 3 here. The first is recognizing that speaking is habitual, not natural, and it takes practice, and they need to put in time and effort to get to that point where they really can feel confident. It is not a switch on, switch off. We're not born speaking. We parrot our parents at the beginning of life, and there's this, not to go into a tragic story, but there's this tragic story in Ohio about 16 kids that were found, in squalor, and each they were ages 20 months to 18 years, and none of them were verbal, which means that their parents never talked to them if their parents had talked to them, they would have been able to articulate anything, but they couldn't. So it just reminded us that, like, that's the first. So the first is speaking is habitual. The more you do it, the more you get. The second is we're gonna show up with everything that we've had in our history to that moment. And sometimes it's going to support us and sometimes it's not. And recognizing which of those habits might need to be sort of reimagined, which ones need to be created, which ones need to be left behind. Whether it's the person with the ums or the uhs or the person who talks too long, all of those things. And so depending upon what the invitation is, you got to take a minute and say, how, I've only learned how to speak on panels. I've never done a keynote. How can I make that shift? And the last one is you guys always have way too much to say in the time allotted. It's just the nature of your business. And the biggest challenge you always have is what's the most concise thing that you can say? And Hadley's heard me say this. How much information do I have to share for you to believe something is true? Do I have to tell you every single, do I have to show you 20 charts and graphs or can I show you 2? Like, what is the question I'm answering for you that's on your mind or the question I want you to have? And how can I get to that answer in the most concise way? It doesn't mean that you can't click through and look at the appendix and go to the GitHub and all of the other resources that might exist. But the reality is we don't really remember most of what you say. So if you can say one really compelling thing and support it, then everyone's going to remember it. So those would be my 3. The first 2 are sort of related to habits, and the third is just knowing that the time and content is always going to be it's always going to be a tension point. And the way you decide that is what were you invited to do and what's the question you're slated to ask and how much time do you have, and honoring that. So understanding sort of what the assignment is and what the question is you're trying to answer is half the battle, which is what we did when we coached for those 5 years. Every single call was, what's the one thing you want to leave? Very first call. What's the one idea you want to share? And iterating recursively on that. And how do you find the right mix of the data and the story and the visuals to support that one idea? And if you go at it that way, let me share one really quick anecdote. There's a business in Columbus, a very large data-centered business that's been around for 40 years. And I don't think they do it anymore, but they used to love, like 2 weeks of the year, they'd send all their data scientists and marketing analysts and people on a deep dive. And they'd say, go find something interesting in the data. And this guy comes up to me at the end of it. I was doing a workshop on structured thinking. And he said, I don't know what they want. Like, he was literally like, he's like, I have a 200-page deck and I have no idea what they're looking for. And I said, did anyone give you a question to answer? And they just said, no, just go find something interesting. And this is obviously before AI. And he was burned out because he kept looking. And I thought, oh my, that's just like, that doesn't support good hierarchical thinking, which is putting the question that the audience wants answered at the top. When you're like, I say, that's like diving into an ocean and saying, go find the baby shark. I posted a baby shark on my LinkedIn this week. So, but go find the baby shark in the sea of, you guys are smarter than to do that. But this was like 10 years ago. It reinforced for me how important that first step is. You guys can sit in the data for weeks and not get to anything, to communicate at least.
Yeah, I feel that too when speaking or sometimes prepping things. And something that I have struggled with before, where I just want to keep bringing points in. I'd be curious to hear, because I know the training, which I went through, goes through a number of sessions. Maybe you could tell us just a little bit more about what that looks like, because it's been such a key driver, I think, of PositConf, and it's actually wild for me to think about how many people you've coached.
I actually have never counted, but the last conference last year, Hadley, our team coached over 100 folks. And the year before, I think we started off with like 40 and then we went to like 60. And so it's, I don't know, we probably 300 or 400, I imagine. There are some repeats in there.
And it's It's a few sessions, is that right?
The way the coaching progresses is there's usually 5 sessions. And in the posit case, we did it in groups. So there was always a peer group to give you feedback. And we were always surprised how much people stayed in those calls and really worked with each other. They just didn't show up for themselves. And that really speaks to the community you have. So that was the model. There were always 5 or 6 folks in there. And the first call is always just, what's your idea? The second call is, get us to the kind of the top line outline. The third then starts to, because how do you pack it with the data you want to show in the story? Like, that becomes a supporting character. And then there's the kind of the full talk to make sure it stays in time. And then there's the, how do the visuals, you're always writing out at least the finish of the whole talk before you finalize your visuals. I can't get my head around creating a deck and then trying to attach a talk to it. That's just, to me, contraindicator. It just doesn't work unless it is like an animation of something and you're talking me through a series. Like, I did a cellular cancer talk once, and he's like, I have it in the animation and I want the whole talk to be me walking through the 4 or 5 different turns of this animation. Okay, that was different. And then there's usually, a rehearsal where you're feeling confident. And guess what? Guess how many times you've shared the story and talked about it with others? At least 5, sometimes more. And guess what? Then Hadley and his crew have a bunch of talks that are going to be on time with a great idea and already vetted by peers. So it was brilliant. Really, as we kind of co-created it together. The first rounds we did one-on-one, I think. No, we've always done groups. But they got to know each other, and I was always just so surprised how attentive everyone was to wanting to be a peer coach.
I find the group so compelling because it's always like the things that I kind of think are like maybe 80% of the value of the training, which is not to like put down articulation, but like there's so much value in just like, hey, you have a deadline and you need to start thinking about your talk the week before. And then you're going to show it to other people and listen to their feedback, which is both great, like in terms of getting, like no one understands this slide. But also you're like, okay, there's 4 other talks. Like now I've seen 4 other talks or 5 other talks in this conference. And I have a better sense of like what worked, what didn't. Like that is just so, like, I don't know, that's just so key. Like obviously like the mentoring and the information about the, like how to give a talk is great. But I think that there's something so powerful about that. Yeah.
When we were in those calls, all we were really doing was looking for those things that were going to get them, like either make them fall off the stage or something where people are going to say, I don't understand that. And we'd say, put a comment in there, like explain a little bit more or throw that out, right? Like just helping to give them license.
But you're also like modeling good coaching as well. And that's people also picking that up and can then apply it when they listen to other talks.
But your point is exactly on that. We provide account. All we really what the core of it is providing an accountability partner that you will do the work more than 3 days before. And on the flip side, talks that are done 3 days before, it. Like there's this term called space learning. Maybe you guys have all heard it. Have you guys ever heard space learning? Where like you've got to like let it connect with your knowledge in your brain. You learn it one day and then you may come back to it 2 days later, and which is why classes are designed in small bits, sort of can assemble. It's the same thing. Like it's spaced practice where you sleep on it, you walk on it, you shower it, you're like, oh, that didn't work. I got and somebody had right. Like, and all of a sudden the recursiveness of it, every time you encounter it, you get better at it. And the more you can do that, the better the talk is. But if in 3 days you have no time for that iteration to happen. So, and when you're like, hey, when we invite people to give a TEDx talk, there is on the application, will you show up to these coaching calls? And will you show up to rehearsal? And if they don't say yes, of course they're going to say yes, but it's telling them we value this immensely. So you can't really get out of it.
Hadley, I'm curious if you have a sense, because I know some of the motivation for this that came up was to reach people you don't normally reach for PositConf and to have them be prepared to give talks. I'm curious on your end how you've seen that. Do you feel like that happened? And I'm curious how you kind of like saw that or what that looked like, if it did.
I think so. Like it's hard to tell because there's like so many things that go into making a conference, but ensuring both the speakers and the audience were like diverse and reflected, the broad community of people doing data science, like that's always been super important to us. And I think like the results show it. Like I think we normally have like we end up like without the program committee having to put their thumb on the scales, like we end up with like 50-50 women and men. We end up with like, all the different races represented, not just like the white people and Asian people you see in like the majority of tech conferences. So I think it worked. I think that helped. Like the fact that you're putting together a video, which is a little intimidating for people who are like very established kind of speakers who, have an existing kind of portfolio of abstracts they can just copy and paste in. Like it's kind of it levels the playing field a bit, and then because we know that there's going to have this training, we can pick people who are like newer voices that we don't, we never met them before. We don't know anything about their background, but they've got a great idea. I think that's been really effective. And I suspect people are more willing to submit too. Like if they know that they're going to get some training, like it's less intimidating than this being like your first ever talk and you're just like thrown on the deep end.
And that was when you called, you're like, you're taking a risk. You were taking a risk on the virtual. And then you were like, I don't want to take a double risk on not only having sort of known people, but the reason that I got introduced to Hadley was the woman that started Women in Analytics, which is now called Data Analytics Conference, actually had one specific purpose, which was to give women, it's still a women-only speaker conference, anyone can attend, women the stage to be seen so they could get invited to larger stages. That sort of progression and the pipeline is difficult. That was her entire purpose. So kind of speaks to the same intention of giving some new people a chance to, you don't become a keynote overnight.
I was going to ask, so we've talked a little bit about the setup of PositConf. Ruth, I found in preparing for this and talking to you a little bit, I found your background and how you got into speaking so interesting. But I thought maybe to motivate it as a little game, we could go around and ask what were people's first talks or speech they gave. And I prepped Hadley and Wes a little bit, so I cheated.
I mean, I gave short speeches at my middle school graduation and my high school graduation, and then my first professional talk was at PyCon 2010. So that was February 2010. So it's been a minute.
How were you as a speaker in 2010? Do you think compared to now?
Well, the video's online. You can look and find out. Definitely less confident, less practiced, I would say. I see things that I did then that I still do now. Like I'm prone to using a lot of filler words like kind of, sort of, and and those are very difficult to get rid of, I find. But since I'm more practiced and I've been doing public speaking for the last speaking 10 to 15 times a year for the last 15 years. So that's a lot of public speaking engagements, and it definitely gets a little bit easier, a lot less nervous. I don't get as much of like the shakes, like the stage fright that I used to. I remember like back when I gave that talk, like I remember the feeling of like my heart racing and like, the judgment and like not knowing like how your content is going to land. And that's very intimidating for a new speaker. And I think for some of us who do a lot of public speaking, it after a while, after we've been doing it for such a long time, we have to remind ourselves what it is like to be a first time speaker, or to give your first 5 public speaking engagements. It's incredibly intimidating, and that's, I think that really needs to factor into like essentially helping create more great public speakers for people to get their ideas out there.
Yeah. It seems like such a helpful reminder for people on committees and stuff to think back to, how freaky it is to give your first talk. What about you, Hadley?
Yeah, so I did debate in high school, which is a little different to debate. It's English style debate, which is a bit different to the American style. But I still remember, like, I think the thing that really served me well from debate was like going to, like, when you debate at another school, you are talking in front of like an actively hostile audience. And like after that, like, I've never had an actively, like, I've had, like, you get passively hostile audiences, or you get people who are like in the front row just like staring at you grumpily. But there's like nothing like going to another school that like wants you to lose. And I think that like that prepared me really well. So everything after that was gravy.
Yeah, Ruth, what was your first speech or talk?
I remember, for some reason, in 4th grade, I ran for hall monitor, and I had to get up and talk. And I just, like, I still remember being in the front of the classroom. I don't know. I guess it went well. I think I was elected. I didn't really run for anything else. I wasn't a great student, honestly. But I did a lot of activities in college that got me speaking. But my first real professional, I remember being nervous as hell. This is an odd way back machine, but in 1992, one of my first jobs, the whole packet to implement national service landed on my desk. I was working in the governor's office. It was like I was 25, and this guy in the office, like, this is your job, dropped it on me. So I had to implement national service in Ohio and write grants and recruit a staff and recruit a board and pass legislation. I had no business. I had no experience in it, but that's what happens when you're young in politics. You just keep going. And I had to do a bunch of like really big speaking events when I was 25 around this, like with mayors and governor, like announcing the launch of city year in Ohio and all of those kinds of things. And so that was my yeah. But I think if you know my background, I spent most of my life listening to my father talk, and he's dragged me to lectures and talks and salons, and so I forever was listening to talks, and that was a very common, comfortable thing. And at the dinner table, all we did was talk about ideas. Every night. So while it wasn't a first professional, I was constantly being asked to participate in those moments, which I think was a good breeding ground for this job. So.
Do you feel like there was a moment where you knew, like, being a speaking coach and trainer was really the thing you wanted to do?
I'll tell you exactly. Yeah, I know exactly. There were two. One was when I was in college. Like I said, I didn't study a lot. I'm obviously not dumb, but school wasn't like my thing. In my sophomore year, I took the first speaking class. It was like my first legitimate A in my life. And I was like, that was fun. And I want to do that. So that was my first. And then in 2009, when I did the first TEDx event, I did it because I was kind of bored in my PR practice. And I remember so vividly, like the month after, going home, and I tell this story sometimes, thinking, why aren't I doing more of that? There were 8 speakers on stage, including John Glenn, who was the astronaut. Again, did I have a license to be, having him on my stage? Not really, but it's the way Columbus works, because he lives here. He lived here. And it's why it's called John Glenn International Airport. If you ever fly into Columbus, you'll be there. But there were 6 people who did really well and 2 that kind of didn't. And I won't tell you who the 2 were that didn't. He was fine. John was fine. But I remember one person showing up with like 2 full decks, and she had 18 minutes, and I was like, "What are you doing? Like, why don't you have one like, why do you have 2?" She's like, "I have 2 talks." This is the day before, and I was like, "Ah." And so I went to look for somebody to help me be a storytelling speaking coach for the next year, and I couldn't find anybody. I found, like, the media trainer types, and then I found, like, the speech writers, and I had been a speech writer, and I was like, "Well, I guess I just have to figure this out on my own." So for the better part of a year, I just, like, studied. I read every book I could on directing and storytelling and structured thinking and speaking, nonverbals, you name it. I mean, I had a library already from school, but I just really got myself re-familiar with it. And then I had to learn training, which I didn't really know how to train or coach, and so I had to do that too, and so by the end of 2010, I was done with the PR and the media and, um, just started in, kind of like, kind of the snake that, like, leaves its skin, and so that was the start of it. It was for sure the TEDx event that kinda changed my perspective on it, and
It's really interesting. It sounds like a lot of it started from trying to solve almost like a personal problem, like something you encountered and thought, like, there must be someone who I could bring in, and then that, like, curiosity just to see, like, what would it take to fill that gap?
as all of you in the room are in some form or fashion are entrepreneurs, Wes, you're starting up something, Hadley. I mean, that's what you do when you're an entrepreneur. You go look for the resource. Like, who is the person that can help me? At least the person didn't exist in Columbus, and there aren't many around. There's been a proliferation now. TEDx has grown up a bunch of better storytelling coaches across the world. But at that time, we were kind of like swinging to the fences. Like, how do you do this? Because they launched the brand with no infrastructure for license holders. Like, they gave away this, the brand that was one of the biggest giveaways. You didn't pay them, they don't pay you. You agree to, like, 5 rules to make sure you do every year, and you go, and you're like, you figure it out. So it's almost like a franchise without a book, without a handbook, without, like, the franchise book that goes with it. So it made it for everyone's got a different flavor, and
That seems nice too, that you get to kinda shape it for the, like, community and for the, like, organizers' visions, and it sounds like you mentioned you're sort of coming back after a bit, and you reviewed a ton of talks. Is that
yeah,
nice?
so this year, for I took a pause from doing TEDx because I had to launch my children, and even though I have a wonderful husband, fall is always busy. Kids, college search, testing, you name it, and I was like, "I can't do this event and all that stuff." Well, they're launched, and then my fall is sort of open, and so the truth is, and it was not an ego stroke, it was legit because the numbers prove it. Many, many people over the last 4 years have stopped me and said, "Are you ever gonna do it again? I really miss it." And my producer, the guy that did it with me for 12 years, looked at me and said, "I really miss doing this with you, Ruth." And I said, "John, I really miss doing it with you." And I was like, "Why aren't I doing this?" And so I reimagined it a little bit. And this morning, because the nominations are due on Friday for this year's event, I watched about 80 videos of their pitches, and there's probably 40 or 50 more coming in. So it reminds me why I do it. I mean, it's just amazing fun to see how courageous people are to put themselves out there and to bring forth an idea that may or may not be, like, fully formed, or that's coming from a place of trauma, or that's coming from a place of, like, incredible accomplishment, like, all on the same stage. It's pretty remarkable to be able to curate that breadth. Um, so it's fun.
You said, "My uncle made fun of me when I told him I was going to coach storytelling." And I thought, "Whoa," like, that going back to, like, college, and I feel like finding a love of, like, communicating, I at least wanted to circle to that because that seems relevant. I'm really curious to hear more about that.
It was a really awkward moment. My father died in 12, and I started doing this in 10. And so my uncle was sort of the next best, role model for me. And during that time, he was in our lives during that time. And anyway, he was like, haha, you think people need to be coached on story? Like, he completely dismissed it. And he was a guy that worked in the construction fields and not with language. And so I was like, okay, whatever, you can feel that way. But it kind of sticks with you a little bit. And so over the years, I keep thinking, like, when I come across somebody that doesn't understand how to tell a story, I'm reminded to tell my uncle, since past, like, it matters. Like, these things do not come naturally to people. Lots of cultures don't have metaphors. Lots of cultures don't understand the power of senses, in terms of bringing them out. Everyone in your life doubts you at some point, right? So
And it sounds like you're saying too, the myth to debunk is kind of even the idea that like everybody knows how to tell a story, that like it's like as simple as walking or something like that it's just something everybody does.
my favorite line around this that brings it to like a precise point, which is every story has a point and every point has a story. And if you're always thinking, okay, I got to get, you're listening to your spouse, your partner, get to the point, what is the story, right? Every night. Or if like somebody tells you a point, you're like, I don't understand it. Can you give me some more? It's in us every day. It's just, how do you bring it to that professional stage to make it win what you want? Like, how do you win that idea? How do you win the approval? How do you get somebody to follow you? And that, whether you're a startup or asking for money or getting more employees, all of them. There's a great book called Lead with the Story. I've got it on my shelf, from a guy who was a marketing analyst at P&G. He's from Cincinnati. And he used to watch all of the pitches, the internal sort of appeals, and cataloged the ones that won always started with a story. There's sort of, unbeknownst to the folks who are submitting, there are some threads and trends that happen in these pitches. But they are the same three that I've seen for 17 years. One is, it's my IP. I researched it. I wrote it. I've discovered it. I have, there's a guy at Ohio State who I've coached and he's applied. We'll see if he makes it. He's reimagining GPS. Like, his whole lab at Ohio State is a navigation lab using satellite triangulation. It's my own way of saying that, using low Earth orbit. And it's mind-blowing, right? That's the kind of thing that you're looking for. So he's, he can give you the formulas and what he's doing on how that is. And then the second is, I'm sitting here and watching a trend. Like, I have a really interesting front row seat, which a lot of your folks do, right? I've got like the front row seat to this like analysis. I may not have created it or written it, but I am a really interesting interpreter, translator. And then the third one is, I walked through fire naked and ended up making chocolate chip cookies, dancing on a table with a whole pack of wolves following me. Like, no one would ever be able to tell that story. It is such a unique personal journey, often like heart-wrenching, trauma-based, and they came out on the other side okay, and they're here to tell you about it. And so there's room for like one or two of those in our TEDx, but not, people come because they want to learn things. They want to like be sparked and walk away saying, God, Hadley's talk was so amazing, and I will never think that way again about something, right? That's the reason why these talks work. So that gives you some sort of sense of like, usually they fit into, now there's a bunch of subcategories in all of those, like mental health and tech and, environment, and you can cut it in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah. Maybe to kind of get Hadley and Wes, get y'all's take. I'm curious if you have any questions about speaking in general or speaker coaching, because you give a lot of talks. I don't know if you all have had, obviously you had coaching through the Posit Conf.
He had a really, really, really hard coach, by the way.
Yeah, just absolutely beat them up.
I'm giving a keynote at PositConf this year, and so I will be doing my speaker training for that. And I think it goes to show that even really experienced speakers have a lot they can gain from doing the speaker training. We can always do better. Like whenever even talks that I've given in the last 12 months, I watch the videos and I cringe, because I know that there's not only ways that I could articulate myself better, I could prepare more, I could do more dry runs, but also I think there's a lot of work just in better structuring your thinking. Like the way that it makes sense to you to present the ideas to yourself is maybe not the best way to present the ideas for an audience that's experiencing those ideas for the first time.
Hey, Wes, I have a question. You said earlier, you said you have some problems with filler words. If you ask me, I can help you, but I don't just volunteer. Like we can, I love to do this one trick with everybody if you want to go there.
Okay. I would be glad for any tips about how to speak with fewer filler words. I think another thing to do is simply to try to speak much more slowly. I think that's another trap that I fall into is speaking way too quickly. And the natural rate of speaking, especially if you don't do as many dry runs, there's a tendency to extrapolate and like fill the space with whatever comes to mind, and that tends to cause me, at least, to produce a lot more filler words. But I think also, one thing, because I'm very immersed in the world of AI, I think it will be interesting to see how as people get worse and worse at writing things for themselves, how that affects conferences and public speaking in general. Like there's a part of me, like, one of the things that I really like about AI is that it can help me make much better looking slide decks. Like I have to provide the content, but that used to be one of the things that filled me with crippling anxiety, was like, I have to make the slides look good, and I'm just not good at that. And so now it is, and in a sense, liberating, in the sense that like I can talk to Claude, and I know what good looks like, but actually making it myself is really hard. And so I feel like that has been one of the main things that's leveled up. But I wouldn't trust an LLM to write anything for me, really, since it doesn't come out sounding like me, even if I feed it my entire corpus of every talk I've ever given and every essay that I've ever written. It's like, sound like me, and it still won't. So
I'll work backwards, Wes. I think that one of the best parts about AI is the ability to help with slides, because there's so much bad slide design out there. You guys at Posit never had bad slide design. Just kidding. Everyone does, but like, you can have such a great talk and then just it's death by PowerPoint, and you're like, oh my gosh, can you please? And my favorite question to ask is, do you really think I can read all of that and listen to you at the same time? So simpler, better, they should be scannable. But let's go to the filler word hack. This is like a 15-second hack. And it actually relates to slow talking, which I want to click on that next. So there's one thing that gets rid of a filler word. Anyone want to know what it is? It's audience participation.
Breathing.
I want you all to breathe in and out, and while you're trying to breathe, I want you to try to say, okay, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. There you go. Problem solved. So just think for a second about your relationship with quiet. People don't love silence. They think that pause is a lot longer than it really is. If I took a pause would that help? Did that feel long to you? Maybe 2 seconds, 3 seconds. To a speaker, because you're in stress, things feel a lot longer than they really are. So that's important to remember. We lose track of time. We think we have more time when we really don't. We think the pause lasts a minute when it's 3 seconds. So we're less likely to really say, I can take a nice deep breath and then keep going. So if I was to not take a breath, Wes, and I kept going, what happens is that I lose my ability to have good breath, and then my voice gets really high because I have nothing left in me to say, right? Versus I'm pulling from my full diaphragm. My belly is really pushing out. It's not really this, it's pushing out this way. And then I have a full cavity to speak from with the deepest voice, the best resonating voice that I have. But it's a lot of people that end up, sometimes they think it's lack of confidence, or maybe they're questioning. I always argue they just ran out of breath. The point on the slow talking, do you want me to speak like this to you guys? Hi, everyone. My name is Ruth Milligan. So look at him. He's already like, no. If you imagine an hour-long talk where you were talking really slowly, like the kindergarten teacher, you'd be like, get me out of here. We are so used to listening to things on 1.2 and I listen to everything on 1.3 or 1.4. So I am used to that rapid. Our brains can actually process up to about 160 words a minute. Clock any of the national news anchors. That's what they're speaking at. But the difference is, Wes, is that they have a break. They've got a minute or two of an introduction, and then they toss it to a reporter, or there's a commercial, or there's an interview. So speaking slow is not what we want. Speaking fast with good enunciation, hitting those really hard consonants while you're speaking fast, nobody's not going to be able to understand you. Do you see how I'm speaking fast right now? And it's really pretty good. But what happens is if I don't take a breath, you and I get really tired. And then I can start speaking again really fast because I got all my ideas together, but it's okay because you actually don't want me to speak slow, but you need me to take a breath. Because you have to catch up a little bit, process what I've said, and that negative space actually brings the idea clarity. And having some control over those undulations, if you will, is really where your speaking levels up, as opposed to just always speaking and never saying anything, but saying in between and then I can't even say like I don't know how to, because I'm so trained, and it is training to take the breath. Because if I say I'm in the wrong business, and I do on occasion. How's that for your 3-minute coaching hack for today?
It's very useful. I will work on that.
You almost can't help but breathe after. I'm like, breathing's great. I'm loving this breathing now. I'm just like inhaling.
Well, it reduces your stress response. If you did a box breath, 4, 4, 4, 4, your whole sort of vagus nerve gets calmed down, and that want to go fast actually gets sort of modulated.
Yeah. I'd imagine a lot of people listening will have probably done a lot of, even probably following along. It's like I feel like it's so interesting to see it illustrated and so immediately useful.
I just will share this. It's a woman from London, and I need to look up her name, and it's horrible. We'll put it in the show notes. She talks about the 3 circles of sort of energy when you speak, and it's not like woo-woo energy, but it really resonated with me. I only found this a few months ago. The first circle is you're kind of like speaking to yourself, and you're kind of like talking about the past, and it's just really kind of internal and, just telling a story like this. And the third circle is like, I'm really big and I'm taking up a lot of space, and I'm sort of like a mansplaining, like women, like dominating. And then the second circle is sort of what we've been doing here, just being terribly present and letting each other take turns. And I think when you really think about what you want to be on stage, it's more in that second circle of having a conversation with the audience. And as opposed to like sort of just being in your head and like talking to yourself, or being like shouting at those two kinds of speakers are hard to engage with. So that's what I wish for everybody, is to stay in that second area.
I think that ability to just like sit with like a pause, like that it sounds so easy, but like when you are up in front of the stage, like every second feels like it's actually 10 seconds, and like learning to be like, okay, I can take a breath and it's not gonna seem weird. to the audience. And you can pause for like quite a long time.
For me, it's like one of the only places I am on a regular basis where I notice my heart beating. It's like you're up there. If you pause, like you feel the heartbeats, and like how many times in a day do you go around and be like, oh, maybe when you're exercising or something like that, but it is it is a demanding thing, and so it thinks like, oh, you're standing up on stage and you're just speaking to an audience, but it's like it's physically and emotionally demanding for sure.
Wes and everyone, I'll add one other component to this. There is science behind, true science, behind the correlation of those with ADD and the stress response and managing time. And a lot of your population and a lot of folks who work with are neurodivergent. That's who brings some of the genius to the world, but they also are not fully executive function baked. And this notion that like, I have no idea how long I'm speaking on the other side of like never stopping is embedded in that triangle of I can't actually stop and look at the clock, because if I do, I'll lose my train of thought, and then I have to come back. Like there's 8 different executive functions that happen: stop, transition, sustain, stop, transition, sustain, restart. And you're going to get that. That's why if you ever have somebody in a room who doesn't stop, they actually haven't created an environmental cue for them to know, like, hey, give it get an elbow from someone or a clock or a big note on their page that says pause here. So sometimes you have to do really intentional things to bring those pauses into any talk. And I say that from a place of just pure functionality.
I would love to be the cue person for someone if we're ever at a conference, just like holding up the like, it's okay to stop cue card. That's a service I offer to anyone if we're at the same place. But I could see it being so useful, like if you haven't experienced that, like needing a cue to really train it or to prompt it if you're speaking, or a strategy.
And to that point, Michael, the strategy that I deploy is by the time you get on that stage, your talk is so well organized, you'll never go over. And so while Hadley's speaker clock is really powerful and a good tool, I had a woman, I'll give one really quick anecdote. She came off stage having spoken 28 minutes and I had given her 18. And she looked at me and I said, that was an amazing talk. I'll call her Michelle. That was an amazing talk. Did I do okay? Yeah, you did great. In post, we keep talking about editing. In post, we're going to have to find a few edits, like 10 minutes. And she looked at me as if like she saw like a bear, and she's like, oh, really? I had no idea it went over. And the entire audience was like, oh my gosh, can she wrap it up? Can she wrap it up? Speaker clock was in front of her, never looked at it. And I didn't establish the strategy, which was what we do now, which is turn on the music. So that audibly, because visually she's not going to look there, but audibly she'll hear it. To be like, and it's kind of what they do at the Oscars, right? Just get the people to play louder music and turn it up. But if you've come to this place with that anxiety, looking at the clock isn't going to be something you're going to do. And then if you do it, I was afraid if I had gone on stage and actually like hooked her, she would have stopped and I would have never had a good ending to the video. Because I was like, I still want to honor this talk and how I know she's going to finish it. This just story in the middle, it was sort of like what I call a B story, which she sort of went off into the wilderness. And so we were able to cut that out. And you could never, if you watched it today, you would have never known that she went off into this big long side story.
Seems to also hit on your shaking your fist at guests, podcast guests not hearing the like unedited versus the edited. That sense of like, look, we cut it to 18 minutes and it actually slaps now.
Michael, we were telling that story when we were waiting for Wes to come back. So I'll just share it again. There was a podcast host that edits their, Wes, you didn't hear this, podcast host edits all the ums and likes out of their guests. And I said, do you ever give them like the before and after? And he was like, no, it's not my job. Like, I don't care enough. I just want my podcast to be tight. And I was like, what a learning opportunity to like listen to yourself with them. And then you say, which one do you want to be? Do you want to be the one with the ums or the one that's edited out? And the guy was like, it was fine. But to me, I was like, oh, what a missed opportunity.
I will say that's also kind of my like nightmare scenario, is having to listen to myself unedited for 28 minutes. But it is, I'd imagine you would learn a lot. I don't know if that's too.
If there was one thing that I want to leave you all, as we sort of probably wrap up here, there is no getting better at speaking unless you're willing to listen to yourself. Full stop. Like I cannot impress upon that enough. And the woman that was our mentor when we wrote the book, The Motivated Speaker, she taught me this one thing that really, it was hard for me to get my head around, which was when I'm watching this podcast or the video and giving myself feedback, I'm in the process of learning. If Wes gave me the feedback, he's actually in the process of learning. Like he's learning by telling me feedback. But if I give myself feedback first, I'm the one learning. And learning is what's sticking. Otherwise, if Wes gave me feedback, I'd say, I live in choice. I don't really believe what Wes said. He's not right. You always live in choice as the person receiving feedback. But if it's your own, really? That's the way I sound? God, I want to work on that, right? Like, you are so much more motivated. I'm working with a leader in town who won't watch himself, and he keeps asking me how to get better. And I finally said, I can't help you anymore. Unless you want to watch your own videos, I am out. I said it in a nice way. But
I will say, though, that like when you first listen to yourself talk, you're like, I sound like that? What? And that's like, there's a very good reason for that, because when you're talking normally, like you hear yourself both through the ear and through body. So it takes a while of like listening to recording of your voice until you're like, okay, that's just how I sound. And you get used to it. And then you can like pay attention to the other stuff. But definitely the first few times you listen to yourself, you're like, wow, that's how I sound to other
I will
people.
send the link for the show notes of this awesome short TED Talk that explains why that is. Because the way where the sound goes when we hear it is different than where it comes when you hear it, when your audience hears it. Like we're hearing it through sort of, a different pathway. A woman gave this exquisite explanation of sort of the biology. And so that's one of the reasons Hadley, it's so hard. You're like, that's what I sound like.
But you do get used to it. And now when I listen to a video of myself, I don't even notice.
Susan Cain, the author of Quiet, actually talks about how she was deathly afraid of public speaking. And the very first time she went to a class, the first thing she had to do the first day was get up on stage and say her name. Sit down. That was it. And then the next day she said more. She said it was just a process of desensitizing. And the more she spoke, the less sensitive she was. The more you listen to yourself, same thing. You're not like so freaked out by it.
Mea culpa. I should apply that growth mindset, and I do think listening to yourself is good. And the dread, is just part of the growing process. I think it's a really helpful reminder that everybody dreads it. Hadley talked about, that initial dread. I think you just have to get over it and apply that growth mindset. I think your point about someone too easing into it, that like maybe having a small exposure, but that, yeah, there's no way, but I appreciate you pushing back to and being like, well, what if I told you that's absolutely what has to happen?
It's the same way that allergists get kids desensitized to peanuts. You got a little tiny bit and then a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit, same thing. But we don't realize it's in our own domain to do that. That's the hurdle, is to say like, I actually need to hit play and listen to this. My current day practice, which I love, is I send a lot of voice memos to people. And I listen back before I send them. And every single time I listen, I go, shit, that sucked. Let me try it again. And I tried again. And then I actually am learning from my own messaging. And by the time I've watched like a 3-minute goes to a 1.5 minute gets to like 30 seconds. It's like on a 10-minute dog walk. I'm getting better. and that person has a tighter message from me. I've listened to myself a few times. I'm practicing my own structured thought. But then again, I'm a total nerd at this. So like, you guys don't have to be. But it is my practice.
Also, people who send voice memos are monsters, Ruth, and there's nothing you can do to persuade me otherwise. What? Do you send voice memos, Michael?
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. If I'm not running stream of consciousness to my friends, through voice memo, I don't know what I'm even doing.
I don't know if we can work together anymore, Michael.
I don't have time for a phone call, and I cannot get this message on in a text. That's when I send one. Monster. I have been labeled a monster.
Hadley absolutely did do that. Yeah.
But maybe do you two do you do phone calls where it's just like voice and not looking at the person? Like, is that something you like to do?
I'll do a chat. I do think, to Ruth's point, I find a voice memo really compelling.
I actually prefer phone calls to video calls myself, but maybe I'm weird.
100% a voice call to a video call. You know why? Because we're spending a lot of energy and time looking at each other's nonverbals. And when I don't have to spend that energy and time, which is actually like one of our signature things, like the first call I'll take with somebody is like, just get on a call, tell me your idea, and I'll look at the ceiling, and I'll look at, like, I'll be in my head about it versus like spending the energy here. Because sometimes I want to take notes. Sometimes I just want to like walk. I'm old school that way.
That's fascinating. Like, if I can't see you, you don't exist to me.
Your team always has cameras on. That's a culture that starts at the top, Hadley. I mean, that's certainly, because I have clients who I will have back-to-back calls with and never see any of them.
Yeah, those people are also monsters, in my opinion.
I can't believe this. I just find, well, I think the voice memo just carries such a nice. I'm also a chuckle talker. Like, I chuckle when I talk, and I feel like you can't text a chuckle,
A chuckle talker. I've never heard that. That's adorable. Is he a monster because he chuckles at me?
Am I a monster for that, Hadley?
No, you're a monster because you use voice memos.
I am very honored that I am in that distinguished, esteemed category of.
No, it's such a treat. And I think, even just to loop back to the book, The Motivated Speaker, like, I think a lot of what I have to admit, I scanned it, and I have it now, and I'm excited to read it. A lot of the things you mentioned, it sound like really are covered there. Even your point about speaking being habitual, and feedback.
And there are some Easter eggs in the book from the conference, from your conference. Assuredly, some of the stories that made it to the book came from the hundreds of people we coached at R and Posit. So thank you for that good content. They might be anonymized, but we try not to out people.
Yeah. No, so super neat that the data community was able to kind of be a part of that, at least in a little way. It's been good. We learned that Hadley hates voice notes. And I think, honestly, just learned so much. I can't even begin to. Yeah, thank you for the tips.
Hey, you're welcome.
For sure, it's been super fun.
Good to see all you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth.
Thanks for coming on. This was great.
The Test Set is a production of Posit PBC, an open source and enterprise tooling data science software company. This episode was produced in collaboration with creative studio Agi. For more episodes, visit thetestset.co or find us on your favorite podcast platform.